Welcome to Access Academy. Today is Mastering the Art of Effective Note Taking. This is going to be a comprehensive workshop designed to empower students with essential skills for capturing and maintaining information that's during class, readings, discussions, lectures. You have so much in store for your learning today, and I am pleased to welcome our very own APH's Leanne Grillot, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Leanne.
Thank you so much, Amy. I am now pleasantly happy to say I am Dr. Leanne Grillot. I am your Senior Director of Outreach Services for the American Printing House for the Blind. And this is a shout out to VAVF, who were the ones that initiated the desire to talk about note taking for our students. As such, we're going to cover these learning objectives. First and foremost, we're going to recognize the role of note-taking in the learning process. By the end of this session, you should be able to differentiate between Cornell, outline, and other note-taking methods, as well as be able to discuss the suitability of each method for various learning scenarios. Let's start with, at first, just understanding the importance of note-taking. Those active listening skills and then taking those notes are needed for success in school and in the workplace. That listening and active note-taking are critical not only for learning, but just for communicating. The Common Core standards recognize this and indicate these skills should already be in place for high school students to use when reading science and technical subjects. These skills, of course, may be implied in other standards and earlier, but you can see the integration of knowledge and ideas for science and technical subjects that a student needs to be able to compare and contrast to things they find inside their text as well as other sources, and have the tools and ability to take notes when those findings support or even contradict explanations. Since this is so when you're reading, you are taking notes. But note taking is not just for time when we read or listen to materials. It is also important when writing, and the Common Core standards actually state that in writing. Students need to synthesize material, then develop their own conclusions while writing, and then while writing their discoveries and sharing their thoughts with others, and doing so in an organized fashion. But what really is the purpose of taking notes? Take a moment. Drop into the chat why you took notes in school, and not just because your teacher told you you had to take the notes. Why did you take notes in school? So we have things like to help remember, to help review and study, to retain critical information, as a memory tool, to help stay on task. So I could do well on that test. I want to be able to review and study. I want to make sure I don't fall behind. I learn best when I hear, see, and write things down. Okay, so we know we have some of these skills, and some of us were stronger than others. I wrote a few down. Did you say one of these or think one of these or see one of these inside the chat? So taking notes forces you to listen carefully and test your understanding of the material. When you are reviewing, notes provide a gauge to what is important in the text. Personal notes are easier to remember than the text. The writing down of important points helps you to remember them even before you've studied the material formally. Let's activate your brain again. Note-taking strategies are not a new topic for educators to discuss and sometimes complain about students not using. Note-taking may be happening during live instruction, but also during independent reading or homework completion. Frequently, you will see roughly fourth grade and up, with often a heavier focus during those middle school year grades. There being requirements from general education teachers to use particular or instructed note-taking strategies. What are some of these generalized strategies you have had your students need to do in order to be compliant to those teachers, or ones you had to adapt so your student could do? Take a moment, write them in the chat. What do you know you have had to help your student do because those teachers have said they need to do that? We've got some fill in the blank, charting, teacher gives an outline. They have to do their lecture notes. They have to diagram, make word clouds, turning all the headings into questions, using specific note cards of a specific size. Okay, keep those ideas running in your head. Let's talk about some of those things that I've seen. I just took a quick jot down. We see, okay, you must pick out those main ideas, or you should summarize with short phrases and keywords. Make sure you note important facts or write down the vocabulary words. Or do you have a sheet with all your math formulas? Requirements to leave space between their ideas or leaving margins of a piece of paper blank. Oh, you must put your date and subject at the top of each note page. Or you must number your pages in a certain way or fashion. Encouraging students to use symbols or abbreviations or highlighting and building their own system. And then you'll often hear, put it into your own words. Some recognized strategies for taking better notes when reviewing the research. There are suggestions such as pictures are easier to remember than words. And if you're short on time, draw an image. Color coding is helpful, but when you do so, it should be after the initial note-taking process. Use short, succinct sentences. This can be challenging on the fly during live lectures. While using abbreviations and symbols may be helpful, don't use too much shorthand or formal shorthand. Formal shorthand can't be studied from because it needs to be transcribed back into traditional words when used. Use your own words, and our own words have more meaning and are stored better in our brain. Don't write everything you read or hear. Concentrate on the meat of the subject and forget the trimmings. Or a good portion of these are things that we are going to have to adapt and change in some ways to make it easier for some of our students who don't rely as much on visual information. Notes are a part of a distinct study cycle. These are previewing materials and taking notes, and then attending the class about the material and taking notes, then reviewing the notes, studying the notes, and then check or test yourself on what you've learned. On the surface, each step may seem obvious, but it's all too often students will take shortcuts and miss important opportunities to benefit from the interplay of each step of the cycle. In the study cycle, each step builds on the previous one and distributes the learning throughout the semester, which is more effective than waiting until the day before the test to study. So emphasize that the study cycle is truly a cycle and is more than just write notes and read them once. Let's start with previewing. Our students should be looking at what they will be covering during lecture before they go to class. This, of course, helps them gain a sense of the big picture and anticipate how concepts fit together. They'll get more out of attending the lecture, step 2 in the study cycle, if they already have some context for what they're about to learn, and they can come into class with questions that they expect will be answered. This is a great way to emphasize to our general education teachers just how important it is for our students to have their material ahead of time, just like all other students. Make sure they have that opportunity to do the pre-class reading. Even if the teacher does not specifically assign reading, encourage your student to self-advocate. Ask for some type of schedule or syllabus, if you will, to find out what will be covered so that they can preview the content. This is great opportunity for them to practice skills before you get to college. If the student is pressed for time, work on building skimming skills, such as focusing on headings, introductions, and the summary. If the teacher provides you and or the student with learning objectives or PowerPoint slides ahead of time, make sure they have the opportunity to preview those and maybe even use those documents to take notes directly on the digital file. The important thing to inform our students is that neither skimming, reading, nor attending class is incredibly effective on its own. It's that combination and sometimes repetition of these steps which would result in good learning. If they've heard a friend say, I don't read for class because the teacher covers everything in class, they're missing this huge opportunity to learn more from the time they're with the teacher. It means they'll need to study a little more in order to learn the material if they don't do that pre-reading. So preview was first. Well, next is, of course, attending class. And that is an important step of the study cycle. But just being physically present isn't enough. Being attentive and engaged will help our student get the most out of the experience. This, of course, is where that pre-view of the material matters so much because our students already have it in front of them.
Leanne, can I pause you for just a moment? Will you please make me host and I will thank you. Our captioner has arrived almost.
So that class time and getting the most out of class time, a student needs to be engaged and having that opportunity to do so. If they are too busy trying to get their materials in order because they were just handed to them, they lose this opportunity at that start of class to be focused on their class time. So that class time is important. The student gets an understanding of the teacher's expectations as well as the areas of focus and translate what's going to be on the test, which will help the student figure out what they should be focusing on during their own study sessions, which are that step 3 and 4 of the study cycle. It's also that great opportunity to gain insight and kind of intuition from the instructor and other students in the class through asking questions, taking part in the discussions. During class, the student needs to take notes in a way that will be useful to them. Taking notes by hand can help a student remember the information, especially if they try that paraphrasing in their own words. The student should be keeping track of their questions during that time as well. And if they don't get to ask them during class, they need those strategies to talk to the instructor and get those questions answered, whether it's some one-on-one time with their teacher or during tutoring. Not the tutoring from the TVI, but tutoring from the school in that subject area. Other traditional strategies in a general education setting may be when the teacher gives notes to all the students, some of you mentioned this, or a note sheet where they have removed key points for the student to fill in, like a closed reading assignment, only it's more like a closed listening one. There's much to be said about having students write their questions during the instruction, but again, making sure they have time to ask those questions as soon as possible after the lecture time, if not during. And again, as we've said a few times, the student shouldn't be writing down everything. And we'll talk about that and how that is done in a minute. So hold on. Of course, you should be encouraging your students that note-taking is not a time to deeply worry about spelling or grammar mistakes, as long as they can understand their own writing when they go back and read it within 24 hours. If they can still understand it, we're good. That spelling and grammar is not the time for them to go fix those things. How many of you feel the need to fix your own notes when there are errors? Are you one of those people who has to go back and fix all of those grammar mistakes and spelling when you're taking notes? Again, trying to encourage your students not to do that is really important. Now, we've been talking about just those general education discussions about note-taking and some of that importance. So let's just take a quick moment. Time to pause, check your own taking and learning. These formative questions are to help prevent multitasking. That's an instant learning barrier, as well as give you time to ask your questions of what's been covered so far. So there's two questions, true or false. The study cycle is preview, attend class, review and study, true or false. And number two, when attending a class, you should what? A, open material for the first time at the start of the class. B, ask questions and take part in discussion. Or C, try to write down everything that is said. While they're busy doing that, Amy, I just wanted to let you know your mic is still on. So you should have access to the poll. Amy, I no longer have access, so that's all on you. I am no longer a host.
No worries. So I can end the poll, and would you like me to share the results? Are you able to see those?
I can see them. Okay, good. So we have that the study cycle is preview, attend class, review, and study. And a majority of you said, yes, that's true. There was one last step, and that is checking after studying, or what we might say is testing. Do not forget that last step in that process. Okay, and the next one was when attending class, you should, and a majority of you said, ask questions and take part in discussions. And you are correct. You should be previewing materials, not opening them for the first time. And definitely don't try to write everything down that is said. That is impossible. And we will see there is a better way. Thank you so much. So let's go on. Let's talk about 3 effective note-taking methods. We have discussed the note-taking in the learning process. Let's review these and their adaptations with regard to students who use large print or Braille as their learning media. Some of you mentioned the Cornell method, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about the outline or bullet method and the charting method. Identified in this slide are basic information about each method. We'll go in depth on all of these, but let's just start with the Cornell. The page of paper is separated into 4 sessions. Course information, notes, a cue column, and a summary. In an outline or bullet method, you write information in an organized pattern using space indentation. You may use bullets, or letters, or numbers in this format. And then charting is a grid-based structure, columns headed by categories, which reduces the amount of writing, or so they say. Let's talk about these methods. The Cornell method. Okay, just drop in the chat a Y or an N. Yes, I've heard, seen, or had students need to take or use the Cornell method, or nope, this one's new to me, haven't heard this one. Just gives me an idea of where we are. I've got a big mixture. Okay. Okay. Nice, great, thank you. Okay, the Cornell method direct students to separate that true piece of paper, I'm talking about that hard piece of paper, into 4 spaces. The course information is written on the top line or 2 of the paper, such as the date, the teacher, the class. The meat of the print page is for note-taking. And during class, you're taking down information in that notes area. When the student moves to a new point, you might skip a line or 2, keep taking notes. After class is complete, phrases and sentences, you complete phrases and sentences as much as possible in the notes section, which means you're kind of looking at the notes and you might have abbreviated just a little too much and you're fixing them up. Then later, the 2 other sections of the paper are used. For every significant bit of information in the notes-taking area, a student should be writing a Q in the Q column. The Q column is 2 or so inches along the left-hand edge of the paper, except for the bottom 2 inches of the paper. The idea of Cornell Notes is for a student to review their material by covering in some way, shape, or form that note-taking area, leaving the Q exposed, which is that left column. They should then say their Q out loud, and then in the summary section, answer the Q or elaborate on the Q. They can say it instead of write it in that 2-inch summary, but the idea is that the Q column should make you able to recall the answers, if you will, in the summary column. So after you've summarized it using your cues, you then re-look at your note-taking area and go, oh, okay, I need to, okay, let's fix these errors. Oh, I missed this piece. And then roughly 10 minutes every week, every day, depending on when the need for this knowledge is, you review just the Q column in the summaries. You no longer need to review that note-taking area. You've in essence created your own question and answer quiz for yourself based on the notes of that page. Meaning you would use a new piece of paper for the next maybe class time or next subject matter area. Let's see how we can adapt this. Okay, let's talk about adapting the Cornell method using a Braille writer. While there is no research on students using a Braille writer like there is for students using paper in a Cornell method, it is possible to use Cornell on the Braille writer if you keep some things in mind. First, I suggest only tackling this on the large 11 by 11.5 paper, as you are already reducing the number of Braille lines as soon as I tell you to split the paper for the Q and summary columns. Instead of splitting the column in half with left and right sides, we're splitting the paper in half from top to bottom. Teach a student to take Braille paper and just fold it in half and then open it before they insert into their Braille writer. They're folding it in half from top to bottom so that their finger can feel that crease to know they are done with half of the paper, which still allows them the bottom half of their paper to write their cues and then write their summary. Students with Braille have a bonus. It means they don't have to cover their top of their paper. They just don't let their fingers go up to the top of their paper. And they use their cues for then their answers at the very bottom. Now, yes, that top line of that paper should be containing the information similar to Cornell, like the teacher name and the date and the information like that. But I have a question. Have you given your student permission to create their own grade 3 Braille while they're taking notes? Have you? For example, have you told them it is just fine to use the letter P and not even do a period after to stand for the word page, even though it's people? Because it doesn't matter as long as they know that's why they're using the P. Or if they're trying to write down what page number they're on or a group of page numbers, they don't have to put the number sign. This is their notes, and they are allowed to reduce what they're writing for themselves. Talk about it. Talk about strategies you might already use in print to reduce your writing, because they aren't getting the opportunity to see notes of other people in Braille. That is rare because these are personalized notes. So talking about ways that they can shortcut their own writing is really important. Even starting with that top line in the Cornell method, reducing what they're writing speeds them up. They don't need to see and write everything, and they don't need to write it in beautiful Braille. We don't write it in beautiful print. I'm sorry, when I'm taking notes, it kind of looks a little like scribble. I rarely dot my I. Sometimes I forget to cross my T. It's okay. Now, for Cornell, your student starts taking notes like everyone else, but they have to stay aware of what that page crease is. And when they reach the crease, they should have taken notes. Now, we know that a Braille page in writing is roughly only 1/3 of a print page, and that's with using the whole page of Braille. So we have to recognize that our student might need to use and adjust their Cornell method differently. The crease in the page is a way to start, because what they need to do is stop and insert a new piece of paper in Cornell and start this method all over again. We know Braille is tight. If they are finding that they, based on the subject or the way they take notes, they need more room, then what I suggest is do not crease the page. When they get ready to study, they purposefully use a second piece of Braille paper with the top of it being the cue and the bottom of it being the summary. And they attach these two pieces of paper together when they're ready to study it after that first study session. This is a personal way of understanding how note-taking works for you, and adapting and adjusting it for your student and letting them know it's okay that they're adjusting it for themselves is important. So it might not look like everybody else's Cornell notes, but it's their version of Cornell notes. And it's the study cycle that matters, not necessarily how you're choosing to document your notes. Now that was on paper. And for our large print students, we can definitely make this a larger way for them to do it as well. But I sincerely hope we move our students to note-taking digitally when they're ready. This may be using a Microsoft Word and a refreshable Braille display, or maybe something as dynamic as the Monarch for taking notes. Some suggestions for using Cornell on technology tools work well for our print media students as our Braille media students. Teach the use of headings for the 4 different areas. Headings allow a user to jump from section to section with keyboard shortcuts. While there are outline templates for Cornell notes, most outline templates use grid boxes and visual icons, which are more suited for printing and then taking hard paper notes. So again, if you want to translate Cornell into using it digitally, do so by teaching your student how to make headings and using headings to jump to the note section, the cue section, and the summary section. Now, Cornell is only one method for note-taking. The outline or bullet method might be something you as an adult fall back on when taking notes in a meeting or while collaborating. This method is when a student writes their notes in an organized manner using spacing on the paper, often indentation. Students are often instructed to place major points farthest to the left of the paper and then to indent or use a different bullet or mark for more specific detailed information, pushing further and further to the right of the paper. And this method works well for both paper and digital. When a student is using this method on a Braille writer, it might be helpful to insist on run over lines always starting in cell 7, even if the student might only have 2 levels of headings, such as the first line starting in cell 1 or 3. This way, they are ready if they need for a third indented level. On hard copy Braille, I suggest discouraging a student from having more than 3 levels using this method, as the paper becomes quite short and only a word or two will fit on that heavily indented line. Now, just outlining is not where you stop. The outline and bullet method can't just be, I take notes and I just put it away. The student needs to take steps after the notes, just like the Cornell method requires. Once a student finishes their notes, when they get home, they look at their notes, they should be encouraged to read one line at a time, kind of explain that information in their head, connect the ideas to others present on that page, review and check for their accuracy, then take the time to add clue words, such as jotting down keywords or details that might be missing, and use those keywords to jog their memory when studying. It can be helpful to recite the information from the outline out loud, and then write a summary of the information that was in that outline using their own words, and then cross-checking how they do. Thankfully, most technology has built-in tools for the outlining or bullet method. This is usually located in the paragraph section of writing software programs. Encouraging the classroom teachers to use the built-in structures creates classroom documents that have built-in accessibility. So what a great way to talk about how all of the students could be using built-in technology, and maybe you can encourage your teachers to build in accessibility. How many of you take the time to instruct your student in using the tools of the outline or bullets that are built into the software? Let's move on to method number 3. A third method for taking notes that can be adapted for students who use Braille is the charting method. This one has a bit more of visual view. When setting this one up on paper, a student identifies categories and topics by reading over the materials first, that preview part. These could include textbooks, their course readings, previous notes, PowerPoints, those type of things. As they review those materials, they ask themselves, what is the main topic of this material? What are the subtopics? What categories of information can be noted about or compared between the subtopics? Then the student sets up their paper or spreadsheet before class, before class. The student creates columns that represent all of the information categories and creates rows that represent each of the subtopics. It's often suggested that the student add an extra column on the far right side of the page for kind of extra notes that don't fit in a box. Sometimes when we give them too much confined space, they think, oh, there's no place to put it, so I can't put it anywhere. When a student gets to class, they pull out their charting method and they record information in the appropriate column by listening carefully, adding words, phrases, main ideas, descriptions, and more about each subtopic in the appropriate category column. If a student is using a Braille writer, here are some tips for adapting this method. First, I suggest a student using rows for the categories instead of columns. And no more than 4 topics work with that limited space on a Braille page. Once the row categories are determined, the student then identifies the subtopics as the columns. Using abbreviations or grade 3 terminology is helpful when labeling these subtopic columns. Students are forced to restrict their word usage to just words and phrases while taking notes using this method due to that limit of about 4 lines per category. There's pluses and minuses to this method in Braille form. Sometimes it really helps our students learn to reduce what they're writing. The charting method on a technology platform does provide more space for notes than a Braille writer. This method is also a great way to encourage practicing using tables, either in a Word document or in a spreadsheet software like Excel. Take the time to teach students how a table can be created in Word, how a table can be created in PowerPoint. That means actually making those cells a table, not just using the squares in the blank, and then saving it as a template for note-taking. When they get ready to take notes, there's no need for them to go through those steps each time as the grid is already built. A template is available to you in those handouts for this method, as well as a few templates I found out there for Cornell. No guarantees on how accessible the Cornell ones are. When getting ready to take notes, this template needs to be sure that the headings for the rows and the columns are checked. This is needed for accessibility. The template I made for you does have that done already. Additionally, knowing how to navigate around a table in Excel lends itself to many careers. When using spreadsheets, do not have the students split or merge cells, nor should there be any nested tables. This decreases that accessibility. When the student is labeling their rows and columns, make sure the spreadsheet has something written in cell A1. Why would I say that? What is so important about cell A1? Does anyone know? Drop it in the chat if you know. Make sure that spreadsheet has something written in cell A1. Okay. Becomes the title. In some way, Terry, it does become the title. This cell is where all screen readers start. So they go right from the file name to cell A1. My suggestion is don't leave it blank. If you look at most gridded structures, that's a blank square. It's not labeled. I suggest use the date, use the subject, use the teacher's name. Teach your student to use cell A1 to their advantage. This is where their screen reader starts. Additionally, a student using a spreadsheet instead of a Word document has the ability to have multiple spreadsheets in the same file by creating additional sheets in that file. Teach the student to label each with a unique name, as this improves navigation. As students advance with this note-taking method, the first spreadsheet would be the template, and then you teach them to copy it, put it at the end, label it. They've got their new document ready to go. Copy it again next time they need to take notes. And all of their notes for the same subject, same teacher, same chapter are all together for them to study. Now, there are many digital apps out there that were designed for writing and organizing your thoughts. Some of these apps are more accessible than others. A suggestion, a great IEP goal could be to explore the usability of various apps and see if one meets the needs of your student for note taking. Again, note taking is extremely personal. Maybe Evernote works for them. Microsoft OneNote has become my go-to tool, and it's accessible. Notation, Apple Notes, Google Docs, AI Writer, Simple Note, Trello, GoodNotes, Notability. There are so many out there. Personalized choice and knowing what works for you is where we need to guide our students. I would be remiss if I don't talk about some of our students having accommodations under IDEA, specifically regarding notes. Guided notes are outlines provided by the instructor with spaces or blanks that the student can fill in during the lecture. Recognizing that if our student has to fight to use these guided notes, that might not be the best method. If you're building it as an accommodation, make sure it's one that the student can actually utilize during that time. When they're fill in the blank and the student has a hard time filling in the blank, it becomes useless notes. So what you want to make sure is that's actually usable for your student. Copies of presentation overheads may serve as guidelines for note-taking and work better than that kind of close situation of guided notes where blanks are provided. Yes, guided notes encourage students to participate during class, and it does minimize the amount of writing required to keep up with the information being presented. But our low vision and no vision students have to skim quickly to figure out where it goes. With students with solid vision are able to jump around with their eye and find one or two key words where they can see where that answer is going to go. Students should consider using a laptop computer and note-taking software because this could speed them up and could help if those teachers are providing some of their outlines electronically. An instructor could also provide lecture notes ahead of time for the student, which would allow them to concentrate on that information and participate in instructions. And for some students, that is actually helpful for them to be able to do that. But making sure that those notes, there's not choosing to use it just for class time. Talk about that study cycle and that there's that preview time, the class time, and then the after class time. They need to do something with those notes, especially if they were not the note taker. Copies of notes from a designated note taker or volunteer from the class written on no carbon required paper or photocopied or shared electronically are also something that I've seen as a IEP accommodation. And while these methods are easy to use, easy to fulfill on, the legibility or clarity of the notes may limit their usefulness. These notes are also written from the writer's interpretation of the lecture, which may not match what the student needs to help them remember key concepts. For these reasons, it is better if the student can take notes for themselves. Audio recordings. Well, yes, of course, audio recordings are the most accurate and complete way to capture class information, except if situations where the lecture format's highly visual, which might be math or science. Record recordings are time-consuming to review. Also not useful for a person with a hearing impairment. If you have added audio recordings as a way your student is supposed to be getting their notes, have you built in instructional time for your student to learn what to do with those audio recordings? We'll talk a little bit more about audio in a minute. But for now, let's run through and check your knowledge. True or false, there are only 3 ways to take notes using a Braille writer: outline, Cornell, and chart. True or false? And which of the following note-taking methods is frequently built into software? Outline, Cornell or chart. Let's see what you think. Amy, you got the reins on this one.
Okay. We are, you know what, we have about 42% that
That's
have
good.
put in, so we'll go ahead and end it and I'll share the results with you. There you go.
Okay, I can't see the results, but I can tell you that the Cornell outline and chart are not the only ways to take notes with a Braille writer. That is false. Those are just the ones I decided to share today. And all of you are correct. Outline is the most frequently built into method for note taking inside software systems. You did great. Good taking notes and listening. Let's talk a little bit about some note-taking scenarios. So how does a student know when to note take? Note-taking from books, PowerPoints, and articles are often part of the preview. Teach the students to analyze the text structure to help them identify the main idea of the text and organize the relevant information. Analyzing text structure improves student recall and comprehension of textual information and enables them to learn how the ideas and structure of the text are interrelated. Introduce students to 3 types of textual structures: main titles, subheading sequences, and classifications. The main headings and the subheadings present that hierarchical structure of a text and are considered the outlines of the text. Sequences define a series of continuous, connected events and phases within a process. Classification is the grouping and segregating of textual clues, support ideas, and categories. Once students know the text structure, they can better reflect on the salient information from the text in their own notes by segmenting the content of the paragraphs in the text. Identifying the main idea and main points of the text, making sure that they're writing them in their own words and not copying. Building the skill to reduce the information in a paragraph by using short context clues in their own words. In addition, ask them to kind of think about those key words to connect structural aspects of the content. Explain examples such as comparative relationships when you see although or but or however. Or if they see causal relationships, such as because, or so, or as a result. And sequence relationships, when you see things written like first, second, third, final, that create meaningful relationships among 2 or more important pieces of information. After all steps, encourage them to organize, revise, and actually take time to discuss their notes based on the teacher and peer feedback. As students are starting to take notes, it's not really just theirs. They need that feedback to how to revise their notes when they're missing these steps. So take that as part of the learning process to learn how to take notes. During class time, encourage again for that preparedness to read the material ahead of time. Think about where they're sitting so that they have reduced distraction and have their note-taking documents ready to go. Hone in on those listening skills. What point was the teacher repeating several times? Well, make a note of it. You heard them say it 4 times. Must be important. Now let's go deeper on those listening skills. During class itself, how does the student know when the teacher is indicating something important? Listening for those key words. If they're stating it, it probably has some importance to it. Listen for someone who is repeating or lingering on a subject for quite a period of time. Do they have emphasis for certain words or parts of what they're saying? Are they also doing those word signals? I'm going to give you 2 points, or this is the third reason, or in conclusion. And many teachers utilize summarizing both before they start and at the end of class, to highlight the key pieces of information. Those visual cues are important as well. These are indicators that our students might miss, and we need to make sure our teachers are aware of this possible segregation of information. Our students need to have the self-advocacy to ask about that pause while the teacher is writing on the board, or when they hear that squeak of the marker against the whiteboard. They have a right to that information and for that information to be spoken. Still, there is emphasis by gesture or even the underlining of word that is just written that we need to share with our general education teachers. Now, those teachers who have migrated to digital slide decks have visual cues as well. Teach a student to seek out and examine font changes, font size changes, bolded or underlined text, as well as counting the number of slides devoted to a particular topic. These are all indicators of importance. Just as a student would flip through a textbook chapter before taking notes to see how long it is or how it's structured, a student should do the same for video notes. This step could be minimal as checking how long the video is to see how many notes you're going to have to take. If the video is hosted on YouTube, you will likely have an opportunity for turning on closed captioning or subtitles. If your student is low vision and has the ability to read, sometimes reading the words at the bottom of the screen can increase their engagement and comprehension. Depends on the student. Not all videos have transcripts, but some educational videos do. A transcript is different from subtitles. You can use a transcript to read the video words at your own pace. The student could also print or save digitally the transcript and then highlight or annotate as part of their note-taking strategy. If needed, slow the video playback speed. Can't write as fast as the video? Pause. Pause it as often as needed to take notes. I know this tip sounds obvious. I'm actually shocked how few students think about pausing. If something is unclear, teach them to rewind, play it again. Still not clear? Rewind, play it again. But a student can't take notes on something they don't understand. So make sure they understand what they're hearing. If they're using the charting or outline method, which I actually suggest you do, try to create headings and subheadings according to the key topics in the video. They might not get it right every time, but if they realize that later that they should have created a new subheading, they can actually go back and fix their notes after the video. When taking notes in an outline form, each detail getting its own bullet point or vocabulary words or keywords or key dates. Again, that reminder, you're taking notes, you're not writing a novel. As they go through, one of the advantages of taking notes from a video instead of a textbook is that you have more clues than that tell you something is important. Teaching our students to listen to the speaker's tone of voice, background music, intense, loud music might indicate something's important. Even sound effects. Some videos also have clearly marked time spans on the progress board that indicate video chapters. Not all videos have time spans, but if they do, they can use them to guide the organization of their notes. Okay. Well, what about the scenario of science lab or math class? Working and reworking problems is an important step for technical courses such as math or economics, and the ability to explain the steps of the problem and why they work. In technical courses, it is usually more important to work problems than read the text. In class, write down in detail the practice problems demonstrated by the teacher. Again, this is what's key to make sure our student has what is written on that board. Annotating each step and asking questions if confused. And at the very least, record that question and answer in your notes, even if you miss some steps, because then you have a point to say, okay, this was the question, this was the answer, but I am not understanding those steps in between. When preparing for tests in these subject areas, putting together large lists of problems from that course or section of material and lectures, and then working those problems explaining the steps and why they work is more helpful than reading that chapter. Okay, quick check-in. True or false, note-taking from books, PowerPoints, and articles is often part of previewing before class. And all of the following are ways to take notes when watching a video, except access the transcript, pause and rewind, document lingering on a topic.
Let's see, answers are coming in a little bit more slow than before. So I'm going to wait just a moment for you to think about that true false question. And all of the following are ways to take notes when watching a video, except which one is not an example? Okay, I'll share this out for you, Leanne, and you
Okay.
can speak out the results.
So note-taking from books, PowerPoints, etc. is true. You should be doing that before class. Very important. Number two might sound a little tricky. All of the following. You should try to get access to that transcript. It's a great way. And pausing, rewinding. Document lingering on a topic can be a little tricky. You're going to see that quite a bit more in a live lecture, especially when the video has been adapted and spliced and diced to make pretty, because sometimes when a teacher is lingering on a recording, they actually cut it out because they want more information in that material. Okay. Keep in mind that repeated testing enhances learning more than repeated reading. From the research, I'm going to say it again. Repeated testing enhances learning more than repeated reading. Students need to engage in retrieval practice to enhance learning. Repeated reading of the textbook or notes has limited benefits, but engaging in self-testing or retrieval practice while studying produces greater retention results, and this is from the research. What you want your students to do is follow the golden rule to review their notes within 24 hours and get them organized. Take some time after that class to go back over their notes. They don't have to spend a long time doing it, but the sooner they do it, the better. By reviewing soon after class while the material is still fresh, they can fill in gaps, figure out what they might need help with. When they're reading back through their notes, encouraging them to get actively engaged in the material. Passively letting your fingers or eyes scan over the material won't actually help much. Instead, explain the material yourself. Summarize the key points. Ask questions as you're reading. Think about that big picture. They should be starting to plan out how they might want to study that material that they learned. And if they are following the study cycle that they should, step 1, review, step 2, participate in class, this will be the third time they're engaging with this content. Oh, wait a minute. What did I do? What did I do? I said step 1, step 2, step 3. Maybe it's important. That repeated exposure to the material helps them remember and understand it more effectively. So immediately or within 24 hours, we want our students to rework, not redo, their notes by adding extra points, spelling out things that are unclear, going back to the textbook maybe and checking out, did that match, or there's a contradiction between what the instructor said and what the book said? Kind of recite their notes. Sometimes reading out loud might make sense. The read your notes is important. Some of our students do rely on their listening skills, and while that's not wrong, it does not get into our brain the same way as reading our notes do. So if your student is heavily reliant on listening to their documents, if you can get it under their fingers, this is going to benefit them. This is where, if they're using digital text, we need to make sure they have that refreshable braille, not just listening. Make sure they're taking the time to identify those key points and really truly relegating the rest of that lectured part to obscurity. It's okay. Simply reading and rereading that text or notes, that's not actively engaging with the material, okay? Only doing the readings for class isn't studying. It's simply doing the reading. And rereading leads to quickly forgetting. So creating that study guide by topic, formulating questions and problems, and then writing complete answers, creating their own quiz. Become a teacher. Tell them to say the information aloud in their own words as if they were the instructor and teaching the concepts. This is a time where they could practice saying it as opposed to listening it. Maybe they don't want to write that part, they want to practice saying it. Have them derive examples related to their own experience about the thing that they're learning. They can take, especially some of our low vision students, might benefit from taking the time to create a concept map or diagram explaining the material, which is using this larger base of page, or maybe not. Work with them for developing symbols that represent concepts. These symbols do not have to be pictures. These symbols could be a braille symbol used to represent something for them, meaning again, that grade 3 braille for themselves. For non-technical classes like history, English, psychology, teaching them to just figure out the big ideas they can explain, contrast and evaluate them. Technical classes, again, work problems, explain the steps. Why do they work? Build the skill to study in terms of question, evidence, conclusion. What's the question posed by the teacher or the author of the book? What is that evidence present? What's the conclusion of all that evidence? We need to remember for our students who've taken these notes, now they're taking the time to study, we need to help our students explore and learn where they study best. The silence of a library might not be the best place for them. It's important to consider what noise environment does work best. They might find that they concentrate better with some background sound. Some people find that listening to classical music while studying helps them concentrate. But then some others will say that is just too distracting. The point is that the silence of the library may be just as distracting or more than the noise of a gymnasium. Thus, if silence is distracting, but they prefer to study in a library, tell them maybe there's different places in the library that have more buzzy background noise for them. Remind them that active studying, though, is rarely silent on their part. Many times, saying it and saying that material out loud is important. Talk to your students about multitasking. A significant amount of research indicates that multitasking does not improve efficiency and actually negatively affects results. Wow. How many of you are multitasking? I've been trying to help keep you on task, but it happens. In order to study smarter, not harder, a student will need to eliminate distractions during their study session. Social media, web browsing, game playing, texting will all affect the intensity of their study sessions if they allow them. Because research is clear that multitasking Multitasking increases the amount of time needed to learn material and decreases the quality of learning. Eliminating those distractions will allow them to fully engage during their study sessions, which in effect should make it shorter. If they don't need the computer to do their studying, tell them to put that away. Explore or teach them how to explore the use of apps to help set limits on the amount of time they spend on certain internet sites during the day. There are actually apps out there that will force you to stay writing that essay instead of web surfing, and it won't turn it off until you've completed so many words. Teach them to turn off their phone. I know that's hard. And of course, teach them that rewarding themselves for an intensive study session with a social media break might be a great incentive to get their studying done. One of the most impactful learning strategies is distributive practice. This is the spacing out of studying over several short periods of time over several days or weeks. Research shows the most effective practice is to work a short time on each class every day. The total amount of time spent studying will be the same or less than 1 or 2 marathon sessions, but a student will learn the information more deeply and retain much more for the long term. The important thing is how they use their study time, not how long they study. Long study sessions lead to a lack of concentration and thus a lack of learning and retention. In order to spread out studying over short periods of time across several days or weeks, giving the student control over some of their scheduling is important. Help them develop a list of tasks that they complete on a daily basis. This will help the student to include regular active studying sessions for each class. Encourage trying to do something for each class every day, but be specific and realistic regarding how long a student needs to plan to spend on each task. They should not have more tasks on their list than they can reasonably complete during the day. But again, remember, it's studying, it's not rereading. Studies have found that studying the same thing 3 different times promoted long-term retention. So if your student can't maximize to study every subject every day, trying to study the same thing 3 times during that week or during that unit has been found to be effective. Yep, just studying is not enough. And when people repeatedly study without testing, they continue to rely on intrinsic difficulty as the cue for their judgment of their learning. But when people studied and tested in alternating periods, they shifted toward greater reliance on that internal mnemonic cues as the learning phase progressed. Researchers found that studying alternated with testing, this is self-testing, facilitated more learning than just repeatedly studying the material without testing. The last step is one that a lot of people forget about in the study cycle. Producing an error, as long as it is followed by corrective feedback, has been shown to result in better retention of the correct answers than just simply studying the correct answers. Oh my gosh, guess what? Getting it wrong actually can help you. Once a student or once a person successfully recalls an item, they should choose to restudy it, repeatedly test it, not remove it from practice. The analyses of memory performance and metacognitive monitoring found that repeated retrieval practice produced superior retention relative repeatedly studying or dropping that card? How many of you used to hold a stack of note cards and you'd read the question and you'd flip it to the back, and if you got it right, you put it in the I did well pile, and your I did well pile you never touched again? Don't do that. Keep it in your stack. Seeing it and doing it again is actually beneficial for your brain more than dropping it. It's important to check in with yourself on what you're doing and is what you're doing working, and then being able to change those techniques. We need to remind our students they need to check in with themselves, and we might need to support them in the beginning of this process because they're still building these neural pathways in their brain. So teach them to check in with themselves. They shouldn't be spending a lot of time doing something that's not helping them learn. We want to make sure that their studying is effective. So, some metacognitive questions they should be asking themselves are things like, does this answer make sense given the information I have? What strategy did I use to solve this problem? That practicing self-testing on a regular basis will help, but also discussing what they're learning with their peers. By using this metacognition when they're studying, they can be strategic about their own approach and able to kind of take stock in what they already know, what they need to work on, and how best approach learning new material. I am going to check in with you again. Let's see what you heard and learned. So, true or false? One of the most impactful learning strategies is distributive practice. When studying, you should do the following. Once you recall an answer correctly, remove it from your studying. Alternate studying with testing. Eliminate the possibility of documenting an incorrect answer.
And wow, this one we are a little bit quicker. So I'm going to end this out. And here are the results for you, Leanne.
Okay, distributive practice is one of the most impactful learning strategies. It sure is. Let's see, can any of you tell me what distributive practice is in the chat? Practice across contexts? Yes, practice over time. Short periods over several days. There you go. Distributive practice. Great, great. You got it. And then when studying, you should be alternate studying with testing. Hugely important that you are balancing the two for yourself. Now, I did see someone kind of ask, what research? What research? Well, guess what? I've got lots of research that I did digging for you. I will tell you that I find very, very little research on research specifically on note taking for our students. And so some of those strategies are definitely strategies I worked on with some of my own students. I did talk to other individuals and things that they did. The research is still out there that the study cycle and that information. So you have a chunk of articles as well as a chunk of dissertations that really are about note taking and the effectiveness of studying. But I wanted to make sure that I had time, and I think I did a decent job of this, to take a moment and be able to answer questions that you might have, that I might have missed in covering. So again, before I start taking questions, I just want to say thank you for participating and helping build your students' skill in mastering the art of effective note taking. So I'll look in the chat, see if anything comes in. I really do want to take some time to explore that information. Yes, this will be available for download. There'll be more information to come. please use it with students. And again, and maybe Amy will build a discussion board for sharing more information about how to build note-taking. But I will reiterate, do not stop with taking the notes. That's only one part of the study session. Any thoughts on touch typing speed and accuracy? I will say that touch typing speed and accuracy for taking notes is not necessarily what you want to focus on. This is where you really want to talk about shortcuts, shorter words, and not correcting. Whereas when we're doing essay writing and that type of thing, we want to talk more about speed and accuracy. So making sure that your student is separating that. When we're note taking, and no one is policing your note taking. It really is for you. So that's one of those things that you might want to focus on. And touch typing speed and accuracy get about a whole nother webinar, and maybe we'll head that way. What about writing questions on note cards for quizzing or things like Quizlet? Um, Again, being really cautious about how your student finds studying works for them. Some students still work really well on Braille note cards. I will say that using a 4x6 photo paper makes note cards hold up longer than just a note card. So if you want a really sturdy note card, use um, photo paper. Great, easy way to make your own note cards. And you can easily slip some of those for note cards for quizzing. You can actually use the two-sided slate to put a note card in and actually do question and answer on the back. Again, what you want is more, again, shorter, smaller section to be able to do so. I've also seen for digital note cards, I personally don't know how accessible Quizlet is, but you can actually build PowerPoint to be its own form of note taking for your student by the first slide is the question, the next slide is the answer, the next slide is the question, the next slide is the answer. And so they're going through it digitally as note cards. Any thoughts on note taking in algebra, geometry classes with Nemeth? The student doesn't want to use Perkins in math. I don't blame them. Perkins is not easy to take along in note class. So some of the strategies that I would suggest are, is your student utilizing math on their note-taking digital device, learning MathML, learning how to access notes that way. Also creating formula cheat sheets and examples, being able to take the time to learn those would be some of those things that might help. And who knows, maybe someone else will drop some ideas. Any ideas for note-taking formats for research papers? Some of the things that I can talk about if you are working with your student for formatting research papers, this is where they're gathering their own information for then utilizing to write their own paper. Once they build one of these strategies, utilizing that for each document that they're reading or each website that they visited and using that for note-taking allows them to no longer have to go refer back to that source site. So making sure they're including all the information they need to, such as where their source was for their research paper, and then their notes directly on it, should help speed your student up for note-taking. So I hope that will help. Can I use these techniques to learn to read and play music? Yes, this is not restricted to do so. You definitely can. Do you have any examples for note-taking methods with notes filled in? What the chart method looks like with text filled in? Again, it sounds like, Caitlin, this is something that the teacher is demanding. And so this is where you really want to talk about what is your student's strategy. If you can build your student's skill to use a basic, simple Excel spreadsheet to fill in notes in those boxes, they're probably going to be faster than trying to line up a typewriter, braille writer, to do the same thing. Same with our low vision students, teaching our low vision students key commands to move through those grids instead of trying to find their mouse to find their location, again, will help them. For our low vision students, they might choose to have white text in black squares for some, and then maybe black text in white squares to try to help separate the columns out. You can pre-build those templates so they're not having to do that formatting part while they're working on it. Next question, what would you use audio recordings to ensure your student obtains all the notes? Sharon, this is a hard one. If your student is not disciplined enough to re-listen to the same class again, my answer is no. Your audio recording is only as good as the student taking the time to do so. So instead of an audio recording, getting the notes from a reliable individual, if you can, the teacher, and then that student digesting those notes is going to be better than an audio recording of the class. I promise you, I have run into so few individuals, and I'm talking adults, that while have audio recorded things, have actually gone back and re-listened to it. And if they're re-listening to it, it's only a short section of what they're re-listening to. See if I have any others. Did I miss any other questions in there? I tried to catch them all. I'm re-looking one more time. Okay, we did have one person say that Quizlet is not accessible for people who are blind. So yeah, you can go fight for that one for me. Well, I really want to say thank you for taking the time to spend brainstorming and thinking about how to make note-taking more effective for everyone, but especially for our students who have to use alternate methods.